Welcome to the Building Web 3 podcast. Today I have my good friend Siddharth. He is the CEO at Skate. Quick disclaimer, we app only for informational purposes, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our opinions and not financial advice. Jax and our guests may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. Please do your own research. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with Skate, can you give us like a 1 to 2 minute summary of like what you guys do and what really sets you guys apart in the interoperability space?
Yeah. So I think anyone who has played around on chain would know how messed up the whole UX is. Like right now, if you go to DeFi Llama, I think there is like 370 chains. I don't think people would be able to name like even 37 apps right now across these chains. So uh, I think like with Skate, we're trying to solve that problem, but we are sort of taking a very different approach from what others are doing. The key theme, if you want to understand us, is that right now, when we consider interop, it's more of like a two-step process. Interop stays at the asset level where you bridge the assets, and then the second step is basically you interact with the native app for that. So Skate changes that. Skate introduces interop at the application level. We are building this infrastructure where, if you imagine like in Web2 world, an app like Instagram, how it can run on Android, iPhone, Mac, Windows, all these different tech stacks in a way that in your smartphone, there's only a small piece of code of how you interact with Instagram, how you see your feed, how you like or share something. But all the heavy lifting is done by an AWS backend server. And then for communication, you have something like a REST or WebSocket for communication. So with Skate, we are building the Web3 equivalent of that, where we will have like a small periphery contracts, so like small user interaction part of the code deploys on all the chains like Solana, Sui, Ton, etc. But the core logic would be just staying on one chain, which is our hub chain. So with that, like what you can in a way see in terms of the UX improvement is that we will enable a single app to run on top of Solana, Ethereum, Base, Ton, all of these chains with a single application state. So as if a single app is running on all these chains, no matter what the tech stack is. So that's the ambitious vision that we are taking on with Scale.
Nice. And talk to them about like, is this users integrate with Skate and now their app is able to be accessible across all of the different chains irrespective? Or is this more at the like user level where they'd come into Skate and they're like, hey, I want to do a swap between assets on Ton and assets on the SVM. Like, talk to us a little bit about like who is the ideal customer slash user.
Yeah, so I think the design concept of Skate is that we want to make the whole layer as fluid and as transparent as possible. So in our model, you don't have to integrate Skate RPC. The way our chain is designed, you even don't have to come to Skate at all. Like we basically want to meet users directly where they are. So users could be on say Solana and they could interact with an app on Base. They can interact with something on Ton, etc. in like a one-click fashion itself. So we started off with this. Like I'll just sort of walk you through like the pilot that we did. So we worked with the say the Polymarket team. We did an upstream integration on top of them, and we enabled Polymarket on Eclipse, which is a Solana VM L2 on Ethereum and Ton ecosystem. So users could have assets in a backpack wallet and interact with Eclipse, and just in one click place a like some interaction on the prediction market or poly market. So that's the kind of use case that we're going for. So all these initially would be the phase one version of things where we just work with the project teams, just do a minor upstream integration and get them the network effects of say Solana ecosystem, Sui ecosystem, Ton, etc. And their user bases can actually access these apps. So if I want to put it in one sentence, we are just trying to make the applications the protagonist again. There has been so much fatigue with so much infra out there, but no real apps. We're trying to bring like apps forward where as an app, if you have found a product market fit on one chain, we can basically make it accessible to other VME users. Like if you are on EVM chain, we can make it accessible to Solana VM users, so users directly without you needing to do any major code change. So that would be what we call as the phase one side of a vision. There's a bit more part to it in terms of the phase two, where it's not just about enabling access, but basically making it possible that a single app can run with a single state on all the chains. So if you imagine this, like if say you do a swap on Solana, it impacts the price on Ethereum also. It impacts the pool's price on Base also. That's what phase two side of things would be, where there's a single application state also across all of these chains.
Now, talk to us about how this kind of works and function. We've had people like, Enzo kind of comes to mind, where they have almost like a one integration, and you get access to all different kinds of things, largely like on EVM. They have like Chain, and it's like a single chain to chain interactions. Now it seems like you guys are very focused on cross chain interactions. So I might have my money on Solana, and I can pretty much instantly make a transaction on base in either the current state or the future state.
Yeah, so I think the phase one, if I have to term it in like a similar bucket, so phase one would be more like similar to chain abstraction side of things, where chain abstraction with the two key improvements, where first of all, when we do these cross-chain interactions, in our model, the custody of assets and all these cross-chain interactions are secured with EigenLayer's economic trust. So if you're doing, say, placing a bet from like Solana to a poly market on Polygon, the bet token has a custody in an EigenLayer AVS proxy. So any asset movement, any interaction goes through EigenLayer and is secured by that. The second improvement is like our focus is a bit more on making things VM agnostic. So we would try to sort of have plays around these permutation and combinations of enabling access to a EVM app to a Solana user, access to a SUI app to a TON user, those kind of plays. That's where I think we differentiate ourselves in terms of the other competitors on that side. But phase two is completely bigger. Phase two is like that we call it as stateless applications. So we this is a completely new way of writing Web3 contracts and then sort of making it accessible to all the users.
And then let's talk about how this works in practice. So we've had people that are like more like intense providers, where it's like, hey, it kind of works like Uber. It's like I state my origin, and then I talk about the destination in which I want to go, and then somebody figures out the route in between. Is it similar? Is it using like an intense esque protocol, or like how does it work functionally?
Yeah, it's completely based on intents. So
Mhm.
users will be on the spoke chains, as we call it, like Solana, like Arbitrum, like Base, which already have bootstrap massive user base, and they would just be signing a particular call data that they want to do a particular interaction, and with that signing, they are staging a certain amount of assets. Like if I want to place like $100 bet, or if I want to do say $100 swap, I would stage my input token, like whatever is being used, and I will sign a particular call data which enables the interaction. Then the whole communication side of thing goes through our executors and like gets attested from our EigenLayer AVS. And once it has reached enough economic quorum of like trust, then like an aggregated signature would be generated by our AVS operators, and that is being used by some kind of filler or some kind of private market makers on the destination chain for filling the user. So there could be like some entity who just maintains inventory on say Eclipse and Ton for doing some apps interactions, and once like say Eclipse user wants to interact, they will just state say $100 with a particular call data that I want to interact with this app. On Ton side of things, one executor picks it up once the AVS attests to it, and then he brings in the $100 for the actual interactions, and then through a callback, he receives the assets on Eclipse. So the whole model is similar in that fashion. It's more, I think, the differentiating factor would come along the lines that it's not just in terms of swapping or bridging of assets. It's more at the application level side of things where we do these native interactions directly with the app. Like you can directly have one click interaction where you earn some, say, you interact with a Pendle vault on base directly from Solana. And those are the things that we would be focusing on. Our
Yeah, now one thing we've seen in the industry is like, hey, the alt VMs come up or EVM comes up, a Bitcoin layer two comes up, and now we have to make a new DEX. We have to make all of these like different like and fragment liquidity and kind of redo smart contracts on every new chain. Do you feel like we will be like with innovations like Skate? Do you feel like we'll be reducing the total amount of, I'll call it almost like chain duplicity, like all these like same apps on the same chains, like heck, even Uniswap launched their own chain. Like, do we really need that? Talk to us a little bit about like what you see the impact of having this stateless apps architecture.
Yeah, so I'll sort of start off with like a brief context on what we started off initially doing with this project and how we sort of transitioned to what we are building
Mm-hmm.
now at Skate. So initially we were very DeFi focused. Like our core product, we used to be called Range Protocol, and we used to be mostly focused around liquidity management on top of like Uniswap V3 like Dexes. and the whole thing was going great. We had settled over 4 billion in trading volume. But at that point, like it was like Q4 of 2023, we saw this whole emergence of L2s, and then everything had become like a DevOps process that this new chain is launching, quickly integrate the AMM there, quickly go live there. Then you get a lot of engagement for a few weeks, and then that chain dies down, the traffic moves to a new chain, and then you keep repeating that cycle. So we did that for like 15 chains. But then later we understood that the biggest problem with this whole model is that you have this multi-chain world, but still the apps are designed to be monolithic. Like there is no app which has interoperability embedded at that level. Like even if you consider like Uniswap is deployed on multiple chains, there's a siloed Uniswap deployment on every chain. It sort of then creates opportunity for, say, this new chain is launching, I'll sort of fork the Uniswap code, I'll launch it here, but then I'll launch my own token and all. And that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why I personally feel that Ethereum has been lagging from Solana side. Like everyone talks from the perspective of, okay, things are getting fragmented, but it's also, if I think from the developer side of it, people are developing just a minor discrepant, like minorly different front ends and all, launching their own token. So it's this redundancy of developer effort that is sort of leading to Ethereum struggling a lot. Because if you go on any new chain, they're the same 10 sets of app. There would be a AMM fork, there would be a money market fork, there would be like some restaking fork and all, and it will just continue in that fashion for the near term. So when we saw that, that's where the real inspiration of building Skate is. And I think by the time this podcast comes out, we are going to have a big announcement of what actually was the most ambitious part of why we started building Skate, where we were taking this all this liquidity management, and we understood that if I have to make it further efficient, I can't do it in like a siloed fashion. Like if I am live on 50 chains, the most actively traded pair on all those 50 chains could be, say, ETH USDC. But now I am handling ETH USDC in an independent fashion on all the 50 chains. So a swap on one chain is not impacted on another chain. So there is this information asymmetry that as an LP I would like endlessly keep losing money to, because it's like siloed 50 pools of the same pair. So in the coming days, we're going to announce our AMM, which actually breaks this whole cycle of just redundant effort. It would be having a single pricing curve across all the chains, and not just like EVM chains. It will have a single pool across Solana, all the EVM chains, Ton, Sui, etc., all of them. So that's one of the biggest thing where we're starting off this whole paradigm of you don't need to do redundant effort. You can have a single app run on top of all the chains through this infrastructure, and we're trying to over time make it more and more robust.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking with Tishar from Multicoin Capital, and he was talking about like the different approaches between like Ethereum and Solana, and how like even there's so much fragmentation, even and like you look at Ethereum, even chain fragmentation apart, like there's so much split apart. Where if you look at Solana, even there's like more winners like Orca, Jito.
Exactly.
It's way more consolidated. Now, what is the do you think will lead to more of this consolidated future? Like we'll see because two interviews come to mind. One is the founder of Gelato, Lewis, and he was like everything's going to be an app chain in the future. And then I talk with the Solana team, and they're like everything's just going to be on one chain, on like a monolithic chain. Where do you think the future really lies? Do you think we'll continue to have this like fragmentation, or will all be hidden in the background?
I think I, in a way, agree with both the thesis in the sense
Yeah,
that for what the multicoin Tushar was saying, right now, if I see how Solana ecosystem is, a lot of innovative use cases. Because if I'm a Solana developer and I see that there are already like say three AMMs who are all good, who are
exactly.
competing for the market share, that side is already saturated. I would not try to build another AM because it's very difficult for me to gain any market share from these three players who are already competing very aggressively. But if I do something different, like say, if you look at their ecosystem, they had apps like Parcel, which is tokenizing real estate. You have Grass, which is like completely different kind of app. So you're seeing these innovations because people are not trying to do the same thing. But on the EVM side of things, if I want to make a quick buck, I can just fork something that worked on Ethereum on, say, a new chain, like say Better chain, and just sort of quickly make a quick buck out of it, quickly launch a token, sell it, and just like exit and all. So that's where I think uh, Ethereum is struggling. That's what needs to be solved. But in the end, also like if an app has found a product market fit, that's where I'm coming to the second point. Like say Ondo, for example, they have struck all these like got the legal structure right, struck all these partnerships with the TradFi giants and all that. So why should they be competing for the block space on Arbitrum or Base, and not sort of monetize that on a sequencer level and basically be the way of people to interact stablecoin, be a bank in itself. So that definitely it makes an incentive for them to launch their own chain. But even if they do that, they would still want the distribution and network effects of these general purpose chains like Arbitrum, like Base, etc. So that's where I think what we are building comes in. Like we can, with a simple upstream integration, Ondo could have like chain specific products on their own chain, for example. But with a simple integration, we can even enable access to, say, some RWFI opportunity on Solana for those chains and all. I think that's where the future would look like. A
Mhm.
lot of these apps which find product market fit would go to their own chain, but the interop will become so smooth and so accessible that they would still get the network effects of general purpose chains and how the things. That's how I think this will shape out.
Yeah, now you guys like obviously help with like bridging liquidity and like across multiple of these VMs. Ultimately, do you feel like the liquidity will just start flowing to more efficient chains like a Solana or I don't know, maybe like because it's going to be so easy to move liquidity. I actually wonder what the reception is from like a Ton or from like an SVM chain. If I'm not a good chain, if I'm like the Jax chain, I'm not as efficient. I would be horrified by skate chain. I'd be like, no skate for me, please.
Yeah, I think that's a thesis. I think that's where I think products like apps become the protagonist. Like if I right now just even look
Mhm.
at like the EVM superchain ecosystem, for example, right now Base is one of the most active chains on that, but Unichain is launching. But if I am like the base core team, why would I want Unichain to be the chain where you bridge everything, you swap everything, and then bring it back? Because in terms of the sequencer revenue for base, most of it comes from the swapping, trading of these AI agents and all that. So if all the trading volume just goes to Unichain, then base will basically be making hardly any money right now. So
Yeah.
that's where I think the conflict of interest is. But I think market always moves towards efficiency, and eventually I think it would be apps that become the core. Because like I recently wrote this article when like the whole DeepSeek thing came out, and it was focused around that over time, like a certain infra layer becomes so cheap and so accessible that its revenue stream basically dies down. Like initially, when all these hyperscalers came, they basically made running a server and all so cheap that hardware hardly had any cost. Like if a product is making $100, only $5 would be going towards that cost. And later it became like all these foundational models like OpenAI, they were charging massive subscription fee. But now with DeepSeek, if that becomes super cheap and so accessible, then I think it would be these AI agents that would be getting most of the revenue, and the foundational model cost would be like $5 for like $100 profit and all that. So I think similarly things will happen at the chain level also. I think these apps will become the key value gainers, and then eventually I think the infra side, it would become very competitive, and eventually like the most efficient one will be winning there.
Yeah, yeah. Models, in my opinion, are really a race to the bottom, and yeah, you've just seen this constantly play out, and that's why my new startup, soon to be announced, will help with monetizing all of these types of things. Now, I'm quite curious. I mean, this used to be a playbook at like the big tech companies. It's if you're first or second to market, you do not want interoperability at all. Azure does not want to interop with AWS. AWS, they're like keep all the stuff here, and then Google Cloud was like third to market. Maybe they were like fourth to market, and they rolled out Kubernetes. But you really never have Kubernetes if they were the first to market. If Google was first to market, they would never have released Borg, which was
Yeah.
rebranded to Kubernetes. So, yeah, I am curious. Like, are these chains like really excited to see Skate come by, or they're like, no, you're taking our liquidity, or are they like, hey, at the end of the day, people are going to bet on Polymarket, and it's better that we offer it in our ecosystem than have them like go through all the manual bridging and forget to bridge it back.
Yeah, I think it's not more of like if chain want it. I think like certain use cases or certain DeFi Legos which are supposed to be redundant, uh, like Skate offers the best model for that. Like even if I consider like Polymarket, for example, uh, after Polymarket got all that traction, it was basically like every chain had a prediction market in themselves.
Yeah.
But the prediction market in itself is not a super liquid instrument. It's supposed to be illiquid because like there is like a lot of insider info and all that out there. And I mean, who would bootstrap that much liquidity for sort of being the underwriter for all of that risk? So like what we saw was that you cannot have a poly market on every chain. You need to have it on one chain, but then if it's liquid enough, like it can be accessed on every chain. That's a better model. Like you can't have like drift fragmenting liquidity with poly market on that. So that didn't work. So that's where I feel the way it will play out, it would be that if certain chains later on need efficient prediction market, there would only be one with the deeper liquidity side of it, and they would just need an access to that on their chain for their users to be basically interacting with it. And that's like one form of it. The second thing where I feel like there is actually a great value add for these ecosystems in a way is that a lot of them right now do chase for a lot of these vanity metrics, and we're not sort of against that in any way. Like in what I mentioned in our version of AMM, what happens is that if for a particular pair someone adds liquidity on Arbitrum, the assets would reside on Arbitrum. So if they want to optimize for say TVL as a vanity metric, those assets would still reside on Arbitrum, but the information for their pricing would be on Skate. Like Skate in itself holds no asset, it just holds the core application state. No users directly interact with it. All the interactions come from the spoke chain and all. So, in a way, network activity from our chain basically comes from all these different chains only. So Arbitrum is not losing anything with Skate integrating on top of it, but actually like gaining the network effects of like Solana apps also coming towards their users. So now if a user holds a massive inventory on Arbitrum, they don't have to actively bridge and just do anything. Like they can basically stay on Arbitrum and get access to apps on different chains also.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I know you guys have helped with like obviously the poly market stuff, their DeFi in the past, and I believe you guys are focused on RWA as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about like what you guys are doing there?
Yeah, I think like right now there are a lot of these RW opportunities, but they're mostly restricted to the EVM ecosystem side of things. Like I think Plume is doing a great job. Ondo has been a close partner right from like Ethereum protocol days in the back. From our side, it's basically enabling access to these things across all of these ecosystems. I think, and it will start off with say like right now when it comes to RWA, one of the biggest innovations is like yield tokenizations, what Pendle did, what Spectra is doing, and all right now. But these things are just limited to EVM ecosystems. Like right now, on EVM ecosystems, if real world treasury yield is 5%, with Pendle, in some way, I can get like even 10% by just sort of having a fixed yield over the future incentives, which might come from points or airdrop or anything from that fashion and all. But you don't have that kind of product on, say, Solana ecosystem or Sui ecosystem and all. So with Skate, without doing any changes on the key app logic, we can enable these fixed yield vaults, fixed yield positions across different chains. And that's where I think the biggest value add from RWA would come in terms of if you want to grant access to across different ecosystems.
Absolutely. And I'm quite curious, like, what was your guys' like biggest challenge transitioning from range to skate? Because like it to me, it's a big change, and it was probably very difficult to do.
Yeah, I think it was a long development cycle, and I think when we started off building, one key thing that I personally enjoy a lot, but is super complicated, is that you're working with independent tech stacks all over the place. Like we did this integration on Ton, but Ton is a completely different blockchain in
Oh,
itself. Like it's like every smart contract had its own blockchain. Like in EVM, you decide contracts where there's a lot of internal function calls. In Ton, every internal function call has to go to the next block because it's basically a new blockchain. So if I'm doing anything like EVM, which would have 8 internal function calls, on Ton, that each function call will be next block, which is say 5 seconds. So a normal transaction will take 40 seconds. So we have to optimize across those things for making that thing work.
yeah.
Similarly, on Solana side, there are limits to how much data you can store and all. So you have to optimize for that. Sui and movement, I think, again, like Sui and movement in itself for MoveVM are so different. So I think that's the biggest thing that we are right now trying to face. I think it's a long journey. Over time, things will keep getting more and more robust. And other than that, I think a lot of moving Legos in our whole tech stack. There is a EigenLayer AVS that we have. There is a hub chain, which is an Ethereum L2 that we have. There's a whole network of this execution engines, executors, bots, and all that we have. So getting all of that right, I think it's
Yeah.
technically very it's like difficult.
Now, so if we look at like an Aptos, if we like, they're written in Move. Obviously, we've got Solidity, we've got Rust. For people that are into the Tana ecosystem, there's Funk. Is there like a transpiling language where you guys can at least write it in like one or two programming languages, or it just doesn't work that way and it's just too
No,
hard?
no, no. It's
You have
it's
to.
it's a different take that we are taking. I think it's again inspirations from what already happens in Web two. Like if I have to develop Instagram app for Android, I have to write stuff in Java. If I have to do it for iPhone, I have to do stuff in Swift and all. But like the most heavy lifting is done by a backend service, which might be in TypeScript or Python or something like that. So in a similar fashion, like our application design pattern breaks the smart contract into two parts. Like the core application part, which right now our hub chain is an EVM stack, so it would be written in Solidity, and then the user interaction part of it, which will be a very lightweight part of the component. But if an app wants to scale on Solana and like move chains and like Ton and all, this have to write this small user interaction part of the code. It just has settlement logic, assets for logic for staging of assets, logic for communication and all. They have to write it in Rust, they have to write it in Solidity, Move, Fancy and all. But this would be a very minimalistic component. So with that, like I just rewrite a minor piece of my code and can have still have my heavy lifting done in Solidity, but I can gain access to like Solana users, so users and etc.
Got it. Got it. Now, we always like to ask our guests, because we have a lot of builders that listen to the podcast, if you feel like there is an underdeveloped part of the blockchain ecosystem. We're always looking for startup ideas. Do you feel like, they should be approaching something in multi-chain? Do you feel like there's something out there where you're like, people need to focus on RWA? What do you think is like a great startup opportunity in the Web3 space?
Uh, I think like when it comes to like cross VM interactions, I think it's very naive still. Like be it just in terms of bridging of assets, be it in terms of general purpose communication. I think that's what requires most of the effort. Like in the end, it would be a bit more of a generic answer, but I feel like what Web3 is doing right now is the correct approach in the sense that you have teams independently building more and more optimized stack. Like you have Mega ETH doing something with like replica nodes and all. You have Aptos Sui doing completely different stuff and on that. I think that's how it should be. Like different teams approaching the same problem independently. But then for things to interface between each of these is what we are actually missing right now. So we are playing a part at our end on that front, and I think that's where like the biggest value add opportunity in the future would be, because eventually users would be tired of just going from one chain to another for airdrop farming and all. I think they're already massive fatigue on that front. Eventually it would be that I will just stay here, but if there's something good, I just need to have good access to it. So I think it's still like value add would be on this kind of opportunity on how the interop and all happens. So I think that's where we are trying to play our part. There are a lot of very technically savvy teams who are doing like Hyperlane, Omni, etc. are working on the same problem. We'll see how the whole thing goes on.
Absolutely. And finally, like, what can the community look forward to from you guys in the next month, 2 months? I know you mentioned like a few developments, but what can people keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think the whole thing that we are taking, enabling like a single app across VMs, it's a very ambitious problem. Like people have not even done this thing even at the same VM level. Like you don't have a way of running the same app on base and Arbitrum in itself, and like making it possible across VMs is another bigger problem. So we need a lot of technical mind share. We need a lot of people to work with us, like for work for small bounties and help us sort of take the whole thing forward. We cannot be like the most proficient teams across all the VM stacks and all. So yeah, I think we're super happy that we won the Kaito Connect recently. It helps us in like targeting the right kind of technical mind share that we need. So that's something that people would need to look forward. I think we'll be sharing a lot of technical resources for people to get started, understand more of what our vision is. And then the second thing, I think most likely by the time the podcast comes out, there would be a massive announcement from our side in terms of our EMM and showing how massively capital efficient it will be compared to having this Uniswap fork on this chain and another Uniswap fork on that chain and another Uniswap forks on that chain. I think that's something that we deeply care about. Like, I personally come from, like, before starting this project, from OTC trading slash market making background. So trading side of things is what sort of excites me the most. And it's been a long development cycle to have all the core Legos ready now for building what we actually cared about the most. And now for it to become a reality, I'm super excited how things might play out.
Very exciting. And finally, where can listeners, keep in touch with you and learn more about Skate? Any, websites, any social media links you want to call out?
Yeah, I think like our Twitter is one of the key channels for us to share announcement. And in terms of interactive stuff, I think Discord is the best place. Anyone who wants to reach out can just create a ticket on Discord. We actively answer it within like a few minutes or so. We have multiple community managers who can just relay the issues to us, or relay like the uh, any kind of co-marketing, any kind of like knowledge sharing that they want to do. And yeah, I think like just keep an eye on our Twitter. Mostly, I think most of the things would be out there. So
Absolutely. And where are you on Twitter as well? Any handle you want to call out?
yeah, so my handle is alt_vortex. I think later you can just maybe put it in the
Yeah, I'll put it
description.
in the description, and it'll be if people are watching the podcast, it will be in the lower left corner, lower right corner. Depends on where you ultimately get slotted there. But awesome, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And let's continue building the future of on chain.